So hello, everybody. You're all very welcome to our session this morning. Thank you very much for attending. Hopefully we have some joiners online as well. So I hope everything is going okay technically, and you can submit questions or comments as well that we can pick up later in the session. So today we're going to talk about alternative proteins. And specifically, we're going to discuss a policy brief that's been drafted, the Horizon for Proteins policy brief. We'll talk more about that now. Okay, sorry about that. So here today speaking, we have myself, Jacqueline Lyons. I'm representing Smart Protein Project.
And there's me, Justine Van Al. So I'm representing the Next Gen Protein, and I'm based in Iceland.
And then joining us online, we have representation from another two projects. We've Sergey, who's representing Susan Chain. He'll speak in a little while. And also we have Massimo, who's representing ProFuture. And just to give a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to talk about what are alternative proteins. Next, we'll just explain the Horizon for Proteins collaboration that we mentioned. And then after that, we'll talk about the challenging context that we face with regards to our food systems in the EU. And we'll discuss the need, I suppose, for alternative proteins and addressing some of that. Then next, we're going to discuss the policy brief that actually we've created. It's in draft, and we'll go through the various points of actions in that and look for input on them. And then finally, we'll have a discussion. We have some experts here to bring up and to have a chat with, and hopefully we'll have plenty of engagement from the audience, both in person and online. And if people have questions at any stage, you're very welcome to put up your hand here or virtually and ask them as you wish.
So I'm going to take over now. So we have a question for you, just to know a bit what is the knowledge of the crowd. So what are alternative proteins for you? So you can go on mentimeter.com, you put this code, and then I can follow what you're saying about alternative protein, and then we're going to discuss about that. So you just put mentimeter.com, then you put the code, and I can see on my phone your answers. So then we're going to discuss on that. So it's the same for people online on the YouTube live or in the Zoom session. You can participate and join us. I'm going to wait a bit. So you can just put, what does it mean, alternative proteins for you? What is it in your mind? Ah, it's coming, it's coming. So we have cultivated, plant-based, fermented, sustainability, innovation, future, something tasty, that's nice. That's great. Okay, more and more of plant-based. Future of proteins, yes. Innovation, exactly. It is science at the forefront, non-animal or crop-based. It is true. Okay, great. So thank you for your participation. So based on what you answered, most of you know a bit about alternative proteins. So the actual definition of alternative proteins is something that is plant-based and food technology alternative to animal proteins. So we're trying to shift our diet away from alternative animal proteins. So it includes food products made from plants, so grains, legumes, nuts, fungus, algae, insect, and even culture lab-grown meat. So we're going to dig into a bit more of alternative protein. So here's some example that we are going to talk about today of alternative proteins, and that some of our EU projects are working on. So you have already maybe heard of insect. So it's getting into our plates today. And we have the house crickets or the black soldier fly, sorry. There is also some microalgae, so it's single cell protein. So it's a tiny algae that you can turn into powder. So you have some example here of spirulina. You also have the chlorella vulgaris. Then you have like the fava beans, which is legumes that is really rich in protein, or you have some yeast, for example, the Torula yeast. And the question is like, why do we talk about alternative proteins today and why is it necessary? So first, we know that the global population is rising and we're going to be almost 10 billion people in 2050, sorry. And it is a matter of food security, especially in the EU. We do have a need of increasing of food production, and we have to adapt, of course, to the climate change that we're facing today.
Okay, so just to explain what Horizon for Proteins is, we mentioned it earlier. It's basically just a collaboration between 4 separate projects. So all of these 4 projects were funded under the same Horizon 2020 call. So Horizon 2020 would be European Commission funding. They're all research and innovation actions, and they were all funded under the Alternative Proteins call a couple of years ago. So the funders, the European Commission, has encouraged us to work together collaboratively because we're all in the same space. So that's what we do. So we get together and we do some joint dissemination, learn from each other, etc. So there's a total of 119 partners when you combine all of the partners involved in the 4 projects, which is really quite a lot. And I suppose if you would like to follow it, there isn't a website or anything. It's just hashtag Horizon for Proteins, and anytime we do some joint dissemination, this is how we communicate it. So the 4 projects, we're going to just introduce the 4 of them separately now. So first up, we have Sergey, and Sergey is online. He's going to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. If not, scream. I'm very glad to be here, and hope you're enjoying your time at COP27. And using my opportunity and my power, I would like to tell a few words about the project which I represent today, which will be Susin Chain. And it's a short name for sustainable insect chains. And from the name of the project, you can tell that it's about insects and sustainable insect production. You can please look at the next slide. Yeah, the project is chaired by, coordinated by Wageningen Research, so from Wageningen University, from the Netherlands. The project consists of 34 partners, which roughly come in 17 by 17, so half from industry and academia. And it's aimed to go over the obstacles which are currently existing for the insect production industry in Europe first, but also all over the world, connected to the safe, secure, sustainable insect production for food and feed purposes. And can you go next? As a part of that project, the Susin Chain, I represent DIL also, so German Institute of Food Technologies. We also work with insect and processing technologies. And from the background, I work with data analysis, sustainability, life cycle assessment, and for the sustainable insect chains to sustainable production chains. Of course, it's coming to the point to where we can sustainably use insects, and specifically project is aimed for the free insect species, as was already mentioned, the black soldier fly, mealworm, which will be yellow mealworm, but also we rely on the lesser mealworm, a cricket. And at the beginning of the project, we also started working with the housefly larvae, but due to the quite dynamic market that was over some time, and due to the changes in the market, that was eliminated, so to say, Of using this insect species and using different processing technologies, we are aiming to produce animal feeds, mostly used to black soldier fly and mealworms, and also food products coming from the cricket biomass, but also mealworms can be applied for these purposes as well. Can you go next? So the project is like a living organism. So it has challenges and has successes. Also dynamic. It's quite common that the partners change and different people come, different people join. We get some obstacles and of course some successes. And among the successful areas, I would of course aim that we can develop quite sustainable products which taste good, which are safe, and which are also tested on the diet level of different countries. And they're also assessed by the consumers. On the other hand, as I mentioned, it's a very dynamic world. So insect sector back 4 years ago is completely different from what it is being right now, and it's dynamic and changing. There are different changes, and it's not only insect sector as well. You probably know about the current challenges any market is having. Of course, for the insect industry, it's very important to find the source, a cheap source of raw materials which can be used. So bio-waste source, but we don't want to use waste. It's not allowed to use waste. That's why we were talking about side streams which can be utilizable for to produce insects in sustainable and also nutritious way, and also have them as a very good product for food and feed purposes and can be applicable. So that would be probably one of the biggest challenges for this project, which we're still aiming for. Of course, not the only one, but to keep it short, this will be the main outcomes. And I think that might be, but maybe if you change the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it from my side.
Thank you, Sergey. So now we're going to move on to the next project that is part of the Horizon for Protein collaboration. So the next project is called Next Gen Proteins, and it's led by my colleague and boss, Birgir. So I'm here as a representative of this project. So it's led by Mattis, located in Iceland. We have 21 partners in total, 13 industries, 6 academia, and 2 other. So it's a big project, but it's one of the small ones compared to the other 3. So what we are doing in this project is firstly identifying like 3 source of alternative proteins. So the first one is microalgae. So we focus on the spirulina as a source of protein that could be added on to some food or ready meal. Then we have insect, so insect in crickets and black soldier flies. So crickets is for food and black soldier flies is for feed, because we focus on 2 types of aspect on food for human for the future, and also feed, because we know that the feed for the animals that we are cultivating today, we are using lots of lands, and we need to change the way of bringing new type of protein in their diet. And the last one is single proteins. So we're focusing on yeast, and especially the torula yeast. And we have done some trials, so trials in feeds for poultry and fish feeds. And it has been quite successful. And also the goal of the project was to reduce the cost of these techniques, and also be able to scale up the production of these new alternative proteins. And it has been also tested for food for human consumption in ready meals, bakery products, imitation meat, and also functional food supplements. And it's the main challenges that we are facing in that matter are that we are encountering like difficulties with the consumer trust. So for example, for insect, it's difficult for the consumer to engage and to try out, because it's just a view. So there is a mindset that needs to be changed. So it has been a bit difficult on that matter, but we did have some nice success. So especially for the industrialization of alternative protein production. So it has been run different pilot for the poultries and also for the fish aquaculture. It has been really running smoothly, and we have really nice outcomes coming from the project. And we will invite you to come on the 7th and 8th of September last year. It's the closing of the project, and we are hosting a conference in Germany. So you're more than welcome to see the outcomes, and we hope that thanks to this project, we'll see more alternative proteins in our diet. So now we'll move over to Massimo Castellari, who is the project coordinator of the ProFuture project. So hi, Massimo, thank you for being with us.
Sorry, good morning. Thank you very much, Justine. Well, my name is Massimo Castellari. I'm senior researcher at IRTA, the Institute of Agri-Food Research and Technology in Spain. And well, I am the scientific coordinator of the ProFuture project. The next one, thank you. Well, ProFuture is a project with a large consortium. We are 31 partners from 13 countries in different zones of Europe. The consortium puts together different expertise from industry, from academy, also from association and NGO. The next one. Thank you very much. Well, ProFuture is a project focused mainly on pushing innovations all along the microalgae value chain, from the microalgae cultivation to the consumer studies and the LCA assessment. We are working with 4 different microalgae species. 3 are authorized for food application in Europe, and 1 is in this moment authorized only for aquafeed. One of the main objectives of this project is to make the microalgae cultivation more sustainable. And this objective is reached by reducing the energy and the water demand to obtain the ingredients which then we will be used to formulate innovative food and feeds. In this moment, we are using microalgae ingredients to reformulate different types of food, like pasta, so different types of sausages and vegetable creams and soups, bakery products, sport bars, and energetic drinks. We are also working on reformulation of feeds for piglets, for poultry, shrimps, catfish, and carps. At this stage of the project, we are implementing the scale-up of the different types of products of foods and feeds to reach, in the case of food, to reach the market and to reach the consumer studies. The next one, thank you. Well, as mentioned before, in each project we have also always different positive results and some challenges. One of the main outcomes of ProFuture is the selection of one strain of Chlorella vulgaris, which with a yellow color and an improved nutritional and organoleptic traits. That means neutral taste and neutral flavor. These characteristics makes this ingredient easier to use in food reformulation and in food innovative foods. On the other hand, one of the main challenges we are facing is the industrial production of protein isolates from the microalgae biomass. These protein isolates from microalgae show interesting nutritional and technofunctional properties, but their production is still tricky because the process is quite energy demanding and the efficiency is still low. And this is the last one from my side, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No, thank you. Is that working? Hello? Okay. Just had to find a microphone there. Thank you very much to the online speakers. We heard you very well. Please stay with us and you can join in the discussion at the end. The last of the 4 projects then, last but not least, is Smart Protein. Smart Protein is led by University College Cork in Ireland. The project coordinator is Dr. Emanuele Zanini. And again, it's a very large consortium. So we have 32 project partners, 18 are from industry, 6 of those are SMEs, 10 come from academic institutions or research performing institutes, 4 are other types of organizations, 2 of them being NGOs. Okay, so Smart Protein is exploring a couple of different categories of alternative proteins. So the first one is protein crops. So on the Smart Protein project, there are 4 different crops. One is a grain crop, quinoa, and 3 are pulses, fava bean, chickpea, and lentil. And Smart Protein is quite unique because it's actually growing these in growing trials on the project using organic regenerative agricultural practices, looking at the yield, looking at what grows well at different growing sites across Europe, and then extracting the protein from it and using that then to go forward into ingredients that are being explored on the project. So separate to our protein crops, Smart Protein is also looking at byproducts from the brewing, baking, and pasta making industries at sites for, you know, a number of our project partners across Europe are in these industries. So this is a very sustainable model here. It's looking at things that would be waste and looking at ways to bring them forward and use them potentially as ingredients in alternative protein products. And lastly, Smart Protein is looking at some yeast and fungi as well, looking at ways to ferment them and make them palatable and potentially include them as ingredients. And what are we hoping to produce? In our case, there's no animal feeds, it's just foods, and really a broad range of protein-rich foods and beverages, so all kinds of different things. One aspect is meat and fish substitutes, or meat and fish analogs, things that are plant-based but very like meat and fish. Plant-based cheese and yogurt is also being explored, and even infant formula. So the project is exploring development of a plant-based infant formula, potentially lentil-based. So one project success to talk about, the upcycling of the pasta and brewing side streams to produce innovative protein ingredients has gone very well. So that's been successfully achieved, and they'll be included in the formulation of meat analogues, or this area will be explored. A project challenge then relates to the rising energy costs in Europe, and that's required a redesign of some of the activities planned by the industrial partners. So I'm sure everybody can relate to that, but the energy costs have really dramatically risen. So we've had to be a bit creative with the work plan to try to think what we can do, because it certainly made it more expensive to carry out some tasks. So for the next couple of minutes, we just want to talk about the challenging context that exists around EU food systems, just to set the scene for why alternative proteins might be a mitigation and how they could be useful. So Justine is going to start.
Yeah, technical problem. But first, we're going to focus on climate change and the environmental degradation. So again, so this is the fact. These are the facts that we have wildfires, we have drought, we have the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that we just came out of. We had the outbreak of African swine fever in Asia and Europe. We have locust swarm in East Africa, tropical cyclones. So this is the fact of climate change, and it's happening now. So that's why we need to act on it, and a way of doing that is to focus on alternative protein and a new way of feeding ourselves and change our food system. So small numbers, so you can have a look there so you're not lost, but mostly the main important fact to take away is that our food system today, and it's not enough said in the media and in the public, is that it equals 1/3 of the global greenhouse gases emission. So it is a key factor that we need to focus on to change if we want to have a positive impact on our environment. So, and as part of this greenhouse gases emission, 20% are coming from farming and eating animals. So we need to rethink about this food system and to have a diet based mostly on animal protein. And we have a loss of biodiversity. The agricultural sector is responsible for 90% of the deforestation. We have the triple planetary crisis, so the air pollution, the climate change, the biodiversity loss that are causing an impact on our food security and on the production. And also climate change will have an impact on the yield of most of the crop in the future. So we need to think about that. So then I just talked about the food security and also the food waste. So as you know, most of like 10% of the food is wasted in EU at different steps of the value chain of food production. And 20% of the EU population is at risk of poverty or being in a difficult social situation. So there is a need today to focus on this population. How can they feed themselves and how can they have like something that is not too expensive and also that is not going to waste. By 2050, as I said before, the population number is rising, and that's why there is a change that needs to happen now. We are almost 10 billions in not even 25 years. And we have, if we keep the business as usual, we will need to have a 70% demand an increasing of 70% of the demand in animal food product if we're not changing the way we're feeding ourselves today. And we also need to increase of 50% the food production. So that's why alternative protein is a key to tackle these challenges.
So it's important as well to look at the context of public health. So in the EU at the moment, over half of all adults are overweight or obese. And as you'd be aware, that comes in hand with a number of chronic diseases. So type 2 diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, their incidence is all increased by this high level of obesity. It's also worth saying as well that there's a kind of a heavy economic or financial burden associated with that high level of ill health as well. Those are chronic diseases that require long-term care and have a high economic cost associated. Okay, so only 12% of the EU population consume the recommended 5 or more portions of fruit and vegetables daily. The average dietary pattern in the EU is considered to be high in red and processed meat, and the per capita meat consumption is actually almost twice what it is globally if you were to include every country in the world. So looking at these facts together, you can see how there would be health benefits there from decreasing our over-reliance on animal protein, decreasing our meat consumption somewhat because it is high, including more plant proteins, whether as whole plant foods or as healthy and sustainable plant-based products. And another context that's worth mentioning as well is farmers and farming in Europe. So farmers' income is one point to discuss, and generational renewal of farms as well. Basically in the EU, the trend at the moment is for a decrease in the number of farms, smaller farms, due to increases in bigger farms. So there's fewer farms, fewer small farms compared to what there used to be, but the big farms are growing larger. Farmers' income is 40% lower than the average EU wage, so it's not particularly competitive for small farmers to work at that. And an interesting statistic from the EU is if you look at the number of farmers under the age of 40 years against the number of farm managers over the age of 65 years, there are 3 times as many farm managers in that old category as young farmers. So the young farmers are not staying around because it's not paying well enough. But we see this as an opportunity where alternative proteins could mitigate. So diversifying, not ending all of the animal protein production, but diversifying at least into alternative proteins, into plant proteins, could lead to farming opportunities, could increase resilience of that sector, could increase sustainability, both from an environmental and an economic point of view. But this will take economic incentives, this will take support from governments, it won't just happen. So next we're going to ask Juliette, who's organizing this whole pavilion for the 2 weeks and who also wrote a lot of the policy brief that we're going to discuss. We'd just like her opinion, and particularly, Juliette, we thought you might just answer why it's so important to have a policy framework and how the science needs to link to the policy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for having me at my own pavilion. I mean, it's not only mine, but still. So yeah, I drafted the policy paper for the smart protein project. Yeah, I think it's not. So you can, way better. Thank you. So yeah, I've drafted the policy paper for the smart protein project together with my colleagues that are not here, but yeah, it was teamwork. So it's not only me, we have to thank all of them. And yeah, we ask ourselves the question why we need a positive and comprehensive policy framework when it comes to alternative proteins. And yeah, the answer is easy. Currently, like mostly in the EU legislation, because the smart protein and all these sister projects are EU projects, there is nothing really fitting to promote the development of sustainable and alternative protein in the food systems. And we have developed few policy recommendations for policymakers to, sorry, to accept. I'm a bit stressed because it's very a lot of work, but yeah, thank you for having me still. So yeah, we develop different policy recommendations. And first, for example, labeling and marketing standards, because at the moment we don't have anything, like we don't have a common definition of what's vegetarian or plant-based in the EU, which makes it very difficult for the consumers to be sure what they want to buy. And it's not like they don't know what's plant-based or vegan, but they need something like general and consensus beyond the definition to just be able to promote their products in every country of the EU. Then we also have the public food procurement. So sorry, I don't know why I'm so stressed today. Yeah, okay, then you're fine. Yeah, so yeah, the fact is there's just right now nothing policy and comprehensive for policy in terms of sustainable and alternative protein. So that's why we need a framework to promote them. And yeah, the paper will be out in a few weeks. I think it's still being edited right now, but then you can read it. That's it.
Thank you, Juliette. Thank you so much. So.
Okay. So thank you very much, Juliette, for that. And again, we have to credit Juliette and her colleagues who basically wrote the policy brief that we're now just going to discuss. So I suppose having introduced the background to the food systems in Europe and some of the problems that face it, we're talking now about how we might deal from a policy point of view with some of that. So basically on the project, the Horizon for Proteins collaboration, we've developed a policy brief that's going to be put to policymakers to suggest actions that they could take to improve the framework, the regulation framework around alternative proteins in Europe. So as Juliette mentioned, that's not yet published, which means this is a great opportunity here for yourselves in the audience, for our online audience as well, to input into it. We would genuinely love opinions because we can make this paper even better. But for now, we're just going to point out the 5 different areas that are in this policy paper, the 5 different policy angles that could be changed. So the first one is labeling and marketing standards. So when it comes to food in the EU, there are some regulations there that are good already around food labeling and food marketing. So one of the big ones would be what's called the FIC regulation. It's the Food Information to Consumer Regulation. And that became mandatory in 2016. So the aim of this regulation was to have consistent food labeling legislation right across the EU. It's a really good regulation in general because it's the first time, I suppose, that we've had harmonized presentation of allergens in different countries, which is very important for people with allergies. It's, you know, it's got good requirements for what needs to go on food labels. So overall, it's a very good regulation. But I guess where it falls down is that it's never included anything about what a vegan or a vegetarian food product is. And I suppose in terms of people who follow a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, there are so many different categories of vegetarianism that, you know, in terms of how people consume foods, people will define things differently to each other as vegetarian. But definitely for food production purposes, there should be just a common standard definition that food producers use when they're describing a product as vegan or vegetarian. So that should be included. It's actually been brought up by the European Commission legislator in looking at that paper that it should be included. It really is something that's omitted and that should go in. So another small change that could be made to this FIC regulation would be to include sustainability somewhere on food labels. So if sustainability is to be included on food labels, that needs to be covered by this regulation. So there's a couple of different ways this could be looked at. One suggestion would be to have front of pack sustainability labeling on food products. And again, that would need to be quite clearly defined. How would you do it? What would you put in the front of pack? Would it be mandatory? Would it be voluntary? It would be also worth having very clearly defined criteria for sustainable food products. In other words, at the moment, there's no real legislation there to direct people in terms of labeling their products as sustainable. So it needs to be very clearly defined, taking into account loads of different things, whether or not a product can be called sustainable. Like being plant-based is not enough either. You could have a plant-based product with a poor ecological footprint and then that's not sustainable. So there should be very clear sustainability guidelines included within this regulation. So maybe I should just stop there. So after that first one about the food labeling, I'm not sure, has anybody any burning questions at this point? Okay, yeah, Nick? Okay, we'll discuss them. We'll discuss them after we've gone through the 5. So the second point where we could have some policy tweaks would be public food procurement. So this just relates to, I suppose, government or public sector buying in food and buying in supplies for public settings. So it's basically catering in schools, hospitals, prisons, nursing homes, that kind of stuff. Public food procurement is interesting because it's uniquely positioned between the production systems and well, basically it's uniquely positioned between food suppliers and consumers, which means it has the potential to influence both production systems and consumption patterns. In other words, public food procurement could be a very, very useful tool to shift people towards a more plant-based diet, because people going to a school cafeteria, for example, may not have a choice, but if you've provided good, sustainable and healthy food, you can do a lot on a large scale to shift dietary patterns in that direction. And equally, if you insist that the production systems that you're going to deal with in public food procurement are sustainable, you can shift what's happening in the food supply chain as well. So some of the issues with public food procurement at the moment, so there are EU public procurement regulations, so they do exist, there is one there, but price is still the main criterion when it comes to tendering. So it would be useful to include sustainability here as well, and to big it up. And one other issue is that if you were to look at doing sustainable food procurement, then you'd most likely have organic targets within that. But meeting the organic targets is kind of limited by the organic foods regulation that exists in the EU. So there's a quite old organic foods regulation. It's 15 years old, and it doesn't allow foods that are fortified to be certified as organic. And that's limiting, because if you have a fortified plant-based milk, for example, and you want to use that as a base ingredient, then you won't get past the organic food regulation. So if you're looking at the food procurement, if you have organic targets within that, then that particular regulation is a bit of a problem. So the potential actions that we suggest in the policy paper would be, first of all, to include minimum criteria for sustainable public food procurement, so that any food supply company that wishes to be involved in tendering is thinking about sustainability and has to meet certain criteria. Secondly, we could revise the organic foods regulation to make fortified plant-based foods eligible for organic certification, and to acknowledge, that they would be useful plant-based foods to include. And lastly, we could look at establishing European sustainable dietary guidelines. So sustainable dietary guidelines have been explored, partially developed in different countries around the world to different degrees. They're becoming a thing for sure. But I suppose at present, there isn't any sort of EU-wide sustainable dietary guidelines. They'd obviously be very helpful for consumers and would shift the transition towards plant-based diets for consumers. But equally, they would be useful in things like public food procurement, because they could feed back in that loop as a kind of a guiding set of criteria for developing your offerings. So I'm going to just hand back to Justine for the last 3 points.
So now let's talk about taxes. So there is a need. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Okay. There is a need for an equal tax system. So I'm going to give you a bit of a background to better understand it. So I'm not a tax lawyer, but I can explain it clearly so you can follow me into the process. So first, the taxes are, at least in Europe, I'm mostly going to talk about the European Union. It is a national matter. But there is an exception for the VAT that is regulated through the EU directives. So these, in April 22, there is the member states that it has been a law has passed in the EU, new directives can say the member states can have a tax, a VAT lower than 5% on sustainable plant-based whole food. So it's not something that is mandatory, it's a can have, so it's up to the member state to choose what they want to do or not. So in practice, it's only Poland and the Netherlands that put a 0% VAT on the plant-based product. And in most of the member states, this tax is it's not benefit. So the plant-based products are not benefiting of the same VAT as the animal-based product. So that's something that there is no incentive for the member states to change their VAT by the EU directives. So the proposition that we are doing through the policy briefs of the Horizon for Protein collaboration is that we can demand to establish a EU-wide maximal equal VAT rate for plant-based products and animal source food. So they can be at the same level, and we put a cap on this VAT. And also we can encourage the more member states to establish this 0% VAT as the Poland and Netherlands have done, and to expand that to the plant-based whole foods. And another point that we can ask for and we want to touch upon is to include the plant-based product in the list of the specific goods and services benefiting from a EU VAT reduced rate. So today we have a list of food products that can benefit of a low VAT rate because it's considered as, on a common language, as a basic food. So we would like to include this plant-based product into this list of specific goods. The next point is about open data and open innovation. So I'm mostly going to focus on this novel food authorization from the EU. So when you make an application, to have your new plant-based product or your novel food into the market, there is an exclusivity that can be applied for the industry also. It can be protected for up to 5 years. So the applicant is protected. So protected with the content of the research, and also as soon as they are on the market, they can have this exclusivity. So it's a bit acting like a patent to make it more understandable. But the problem is that it doesn't stimulate the food sector, and the competitors and also others in the food sector has to wait for this information to be available and to be freely available into scientific literature. So it means that the food system is lacking behind, and it takes so much time to come up with this novel food into the plate of the consumer, because it's only the applicant who's going to have like the monopoly for a certain time. So it's like delaying this food to come to the market. So what we want and what we are asking in the policy brief is to revise this data protection and to review the rules on this data protection and reduce this exclusivity time. The next one and the final one of the 5 points of the policies that we would like to talk about with the Horizon for Protein collaboration is about the subsidies. So as you know, the EU is, and anywhere in the world, each country is having subsidies to help a food producer. And out of all these subsidies, so it's 1.8 trillion in the whole world that is considered subsidies. And out of that, there is, no, my bad. I'm sorry, I'm gonna correct myself. So out of all the subsidies in the world that exist, there is 1.8 trillion of subsidies that are directed to environmentally harmful subsidies. So they are included in that, which means that there are subsidies that are pushing on animal farming, or they are pushing on deforestation, and they are going towards this biodiversity loss. So all these harmful subsidies represent 2% of the global GDP in the world. So it's a lot. And out of that, there is $520 billion that are going for the agricultural sectors, which is a lot. So these subsidies could be redirected. And there is also a problem in the research and innovation funding, is that, for example, we are talking about this project, so many may ask themselves, like, why is there a problem with the innovation? Because the EU funded this full project, but the combined amount that we got with the EU money for the Horizon for Protein project is only 30 million euro. And out of all the project that the Horizon 2020 had, it was 95.5 billion euros. So it's just a small portion that has been allocated for alternative protein. So it's not that much. So the percentage of allocation of the budget should increase. So that's what we would like to have in the future. So we need more research to shift to this plant-based diet, mostly to scale it up, but also for food safety. We want good and safe food in our plate, and this needs research, and this needs a lot of time for researcher in the lab to figure it out, how to reach that. So more funding means that it will be faster. So the proposition that we have is the Horizon for Protein projects are that to use the EU public funding tools to accelerate the transition to a more plant-rich food system. And as I said, to revise this EU agricultural promotion policy, and then to increase the R&D fundings for plant-based innovation. So now we're just presenting you the 5 months of the policy brief, and we are welcoming the public, so online and also here with us at the COP27. And we have a guest speaker that will come with you. It's Nick Hazel. So I would like to welcome Nick on the stage. Thank you for being with us all the way from Australia. And he's the CEO and founder of V2 Food. So first, I would like you to present yourself, introduce yourself, and then any feedback and comments about the policy brief are welcome. And same for you in the crowd, and you can use the Mentimeter code as it was before to share your question.
Thank you. Shall I sit down? Yeah. God, there's so much there. So just introduce myself. So I'm Nick Hazel. I'm the founder and CEO of V2 Food. We're Australia's #1 plant-based meat company. We're a startup. We've been going for just over 3 years, and we are now sort of exponentially growing this into mainstream plant-based meat. So a lot of what you're talking about is really close to home. Regulation is close to home. Labeling is close to home, because we've been fighting off labeling issues from the meat lobby, actually. My background actually is as R&D director of big multinationals. So I was R&D director for PepsiCo. I've been R&D director for Mars. And so I kind of straddle both sort of the entrepreneur bit, but also big corporate. So I have a perspective also on some of the legislation. I am European, I'm English, but I haven't lived in England for 30 years. So I'm based in Australia. I've been in Australia for 20 years. V2 Food is Australian, but we are expanding around the world. And certainly what happens in Europe is really interesting for us. Australia and Europe, there's a lot of ties. A lot of the regulatory framework is very similar. There's a lot of copying of Australia, particularly with the EU. And what used to be in the EU, there's a country called the UK, which apparently was in the EU at some point. And so it's very interesting for me to listen to this framework. So in terms of specifics, I'm not sure whether we want to get into a discussion on that. There's a lot of things I think resonate with me. Oh, goodness me. Well, first of all, I don't know how you can ever get anything done with consortia with 32 members and whatever. So I would just suggest that when we do basic research, and we do a lot of basic research, V2 Food is trying to solve the technical problems behind plant-based meat. So actually, you know, we're also working with Wageningen. We're talking to the same people. I'm in the algae space. I'm figuring that out. We're looking at the cropping and how do we do that. We're looking at carbon labeling. So it's actually, there's a lot of things that you're doing are also what we're doing. One thing that really helps us is when we focus on the really fundamental problem, for example. So for algae, the fundamental problem with algae, it's cost. Yeah. Well, there's 3 fundamental problems. It's cost, it's approving of novel strains. You know, there's thousands of strains of algae, all might be very useful, but you've only got 3 that are actually allowed to be used in food. And the process for doing that in Europe is actually quite lengthy. It's more lengthy in Europe than it is, for example, in Australia. It takes 2 or 3 years to do it. So that's a problem. The other 2 things about algae, for example, would be nobody wants to put algae in food that tastes of algae. Yeah, unless you're making seafood. It's fundamental. So the science has to go after the fundamentals. So cost, regulation, taste, for example, will be fundamentals. And then there's a whole thing about we're certainly working a lot on how do you make algae cheaply. So that's the fundamental thing for there. We can talk about the others, but let's have a discussion.
Thank you so much for your input, Nick. So yes, algae is one of the future, and we need to dig into that. But first, I would like to welcome, if you have any question in the public, you're more than welcome, and I will pass you the mic, and we can answer them together.
It's on. Yeah, thank you. I'm Joseph. I'm from Uganda. I'm working with the Banana Industrial Research and Development Center. And with this problem of Ukraine, we had a problem of, I'm Joseph from Uganda. I'm working with the Banana Industrial Research and Development Center. We are adding value to the banana to produce flour, and so we are using it for baking products. And because of the problem in Ukraine, we had a problem of how to access wheat. And then, so we are using the banana flour to bake our products like bread, like donuts, like biscuits. I have a sample here of what we are producing right now. And in your slide, this is a banana biscuit baked from the banana wheat, banana flour. So I saw the problem of the slide on health, public health. And in the slide, you are indicating that half of the adults are obese. And of course, obese from our food science is caused by gluten. And since we are producing banana flour that is gluten-free, I was also of the intimacy that you'll be able to access this banana flour for baking products so that you can be able to produce on your obesity problem as a public health. The other question was to do with the procurement of public food and the labeling and the marketing. So if we are going to access the market in terms of selling our flour, gluten-free flour, how do we influence our people in the labeling and marketing process so that we can be able, as a global community, to access this facility that we have? Yes.
So are you asking how to, well, so if you were marketing a gluten-free banana flour, so if it's a food, then it would just fit within the standards in terms of food labeling. There would be certain criteria to apply, but if it's a food, it would just have to go into under that regulation and just have a certain type of labeling and etc. Yeah. So you're asking how would we understand the labeling and the marketing regulations? Well, they're there. I mean, typically food producers in Ireland who are small food producers, there are a couple of consultants who work closely with those regulations and they would interact with them because they'd understand all the tiny detail. But it's all understandable to certain people. And then so from my experience, people often work with somebody who's a little bit closer to it, but it's all out there in the public domain. You know, it's all freely available, it's all accessible, and then you would just work within that regulation with your food product. Okay.
Thank you so much. More questions?
I'm sorry.
You
Sorry?
can go up.
Nah, it's just a small question. I was wondering because, hello, I'm from Chile, Gerardo.
Nice to meet you.
And in my country, there is a problem with alternative proteins about the skepticism of the people, like about insects, about processed food. And I was wondering, how are you working with insects and alternative ones? But I'm not sitting here.
Thank you for your questions. So I'm going to answer part of these questions. So we do have a partner in one of the projects that is Deal. This one is better. And we are doing a consumer survey, and we're also doing like food tasting. So actually from where my institution, we are doing some tests on the consumer. So we did some tastes without knowing what was in our food. And it was containing spirulina and also torula, so the yeast. So it's like understanding how it is conceived by the consumer. So there is many sensory panel. That was the word I was looking for. There is lots of sensory analysis. So it's like inviting the consumer to try novel food and to see how they react to it. Do they like it or not? And then changing the recipe to make it more accepted by the consumer. Would you like to add on?
Yeah, certainly when what we're doing is meat, plant-based meat. And we have a very simple philosophy. It's got to be cheaper than meat, because the average consumer in the world thinks meat's too expensive. It's got to be more delicious than meat. And you've got to be able to use it in the dishes that you like to cook in your country. In Australia, there might be a spaghetti bolognese or a pie. In Iceland, I've got no idea what you do, but it's got to be locally relevant. So it has to work, because nobody is looking for new food. we're very conservative with food. We want to eat what our mums taught us to eat. That's a evolutionary design, conservatism in food. It stops us poisoning ourselves. We do what our parents and our friends teach us. So the job to be done is a science job. Really, make sure it's affordable, make sure it tastes the same or more delicious and actually fits in your cuisine. And then the last thing is got to be available. If you can't buy it in the supermarket next to the meat, no one's going to buy it. So it's got to be available wherever you buy your meat. And in Ghana, that will be a wet market potentially, different supply chain. In Australia, it will be in a supermarket, and in Europe, it'll be at Carrefour.
And to come back to that, the availability of food, for example, insect has been eaten for many centuries in Asia and Indonesia, so it's something really normal to eat. But when we go to Europe or Northern America, it's not something usual. So if you make this food more available to the consumer, and the mindset will change. So there is the science, the texture and the taste and the cost available for the consumer, and also the regulation that allows this new product to come into the market. So then you can try it, make your own opinion, and hopefully change it or shift to this diet.
Do you believe that, I don't know, in 20, 30, 40 years more, is it possible that everyone is going to eat plant-based proteins?
Well, it has to be a much higher percentage now. It has to be 50% or more by 2040, and maybe north of that. I don't think it's helpful to say people have to become plant-based, because that creates a warfare between meat and plant. That's not the point. We just have to reduce our reliance on animal consumption, because animal meat consumption is super inefficient. It just uses too much land, too much resources. But it's not helpful to go into warfare and go into tribes. I'm not a vegan, but I have reduced my meat consumption dramatically over the years, but I'm still going to eat meat.
Yeah, I actually really like that comment from Nick. I'm also not a vegan, and I'm very interested in people just reducing their animal protein, increasing their plant protein. And I think it's more realistic. And I'm from Ireland as well. There's lots of really good meat and dairy farming. We've really good grass. We do it very well. It's important. So, you know, it's more about kind of transitioning away without, I think, deleting something entirely. And just going back to maybe one of your original points as well about how will people react to processed foods or to very processed plant products. I agree as well that that's a concern, because people don't like to, you know, when people even say the term processed foods, they always think of it in a negative connotation. What I would say is that there's ultra processed foods. That's a particular category of processed foods, and those ones really have a lot going on, and they're quite a bit away from, say, the original food product. But then, you know, bread is a processed food. Like an awful lot of foods just have to undergo something to become something other than the raw ingredients. So I think the term processed always freaks people out. Lots of stuff is processed. Ultra processed is possibly where you're thinking of and what consumers might worry about. And I think because these healthy plant-based products, healthy alternative protein products we're talking about should be always sustainable, otherwise it defeats the purpose, then a lot of them hopefully won't be ultra processed foods, because to be sustainable should be, you know, a shorter ingredient list anyway, and something more simple and local. So hopefully these products would end in the processed sphere rather than ultra processed, and that would be more acceptable, I think. Are there other questions from people here? We'd love for you to come up. Spare chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Sorry, I missed the beginning of the panel, so I apologize. But I have celiac disease, and of course, I'm looking for healthy, gluten-free food, and also, you know, not meats and from animal-based products. But the problem with the products for celiac it's ultra processed and it has no nutrition value, or it's very processed.
So
Can't find anything.
yeah, I have a view on processed, because obviously if we didn't process food, we wouldn't exist as a species. That's the whole nature of what we do. We cook to release nutrition in food. I'd rather have a debate about nutritious food and not nutritious food. And you can have unprocessed raw celery, which you are not going to survive on. It may be unprocessed, but it's not very nutritious. So I think the job to be done, and with V2 Food, what we do is we make sure that it has all of the nutrition of meat. So the reason why we like meat, the human species loves meat, is because it has nutritional value. There are certain things in meat which are more difficult to get if you had only a plant-based diet. We are omnivores, and there's a reason for that. So we need to make sure that the plant-based meat has exactly the same good things, you know, B12, iron, a good mix of the amino acids that we need. And the additional benefit, of course, is the plants, because you do get the good things to nourish your microbiome, which is the fiber. In terms of processed, unprocessed, I'm very proudly processed. It will always be processed, but there's nothing wrong with being processed, and we need to move this debate on. There's a lot of money going in from actual lobby groups that you wouldn't particularly want to lobby for processed and ultra processed, because effectively what it's doing, it's battling against all of the alternative proteins and all of the plant-based, because pretty much most of it has to be processed in some way for it to deliver both nutrition and stuff that tastes really good. So be aware of that debate. It's not a real academic debate, I don't think, around processing and over processing. There should be a real debate about what is nutritious and not nutritious.
Thank you. So we are done with the time. So yes. So thank you so much for your participation in the audience, and also thank you, Nick, for coming on stage and being with us and sharing your really bright insights. And we thank you online for following us. And now we're going to close this session about alternative protein and the horizon for protein collaboration. You're welcome to follow the projects online. They're all going to close next year in 2023.
Except smart protein, which is 2024. Yeah.
Yes. But we're more welcome to connect with us. So there is our emails here if you want to connect with both of us, or you can talk to us afterwards once we're done. And thank you so much for your input, all of you, and see you next year at the COP28, or see you online, and have a good day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.